In the middle of the 17th century, the Dutch Republic consisted of barely 2 million people clinging to a waterlogged sliver of European marshland. Nearly half their territory sat below sea level, under constant threat from the roaring North Sea. Yet from this flooded swamp, they built the most dominant commercial empire on Earth, scaled to the modern adjusted market valuation of the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. The company towers over the combined market caps of Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, peaking at an astronomical $7.9 trillion. It was the world's first multinational megacorporation. To fund an enterprise of this scale, the Dutch had to invent modern capitalism out of thin air. Inside the courtyard of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, ordinary merchants and bakers pooled their money into a permanent capital structure. They created the first liquid equity market, complete with short selling, options contracts, and futures. Armed with infinite capital, the VOC deployed massive fleets across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They captured spice islands in the Moluccas, established headquarters in Batavia, and enforced a global monopoly on nutmeg and cloves through absolute, unapologetic commercial violence. Dutch supremacy was a highly engineered corporate machine built on ruthless maritime efficiency, cheap cargo ships called flutes, and absolute monopolistic control over European logistics. For centuries, popular history has blamed the downfall of this colossal empire on a single episode of economic insanity, the tulip mania of 1637. The story goes that a speculative bubble over flower bulbs shattered the Dutch economy. The mania centered around incredibly rare, virus-infected bulbs that produced stunning, multicolored flowers like these crimson and white-streaked petals. Because bulbs stay dormant 9 months of the year, Dutch traders in smoky taverns began buying and selling contracts for future harvests, inventing the world's first commodity futures market. By January 1637, a single rare bulb could cost as much as a fully furnished Amsterdam canal mansion. Then, during a routine auction in February, a bidder refused to buy. Panic rippled through the taverns. Within days, the market collapsed, and the contracts became worthless slips of paper. But if you look at the actual economic data from 1637, you'll see a different story. This timeline tracks tulip prices against VOC trade volume. The flower market evaporated, but the golden line representing the Dutch East India Company climbed straight through the crash. To find what actually broke this empire, we have to look past the flowers and into the very structure of the Dutch state. The Dutch Republic was a loose confederation of 7 fiercely independent provinces. Every major national decision, from declaring war to levying taxes, required unanimous consent from all 7, creating a glacial bureaucratic paralysis right in the middle of a bitter political civil war. One side of this divide was the Republican faction, led by the Grand Pensionary Johan de Witt. De Witt and his wealthy merchant oligarchs were pacifists and focused on protecting commercial profits. They slashed army budgets and directed every spare guilder into the navy to protect maritime trade routes. That strategy collided with the brutal reality of European geography. This map shows the continental trap. Unlike Great Britain, which was isolated and protected by the English Channel, the Netherlands was physically attached to the continent. They shared flat, exposed land borders with 2 aggressive military superpowers, the Spanish Empire and Louis XIV's France. To survive, the Dutch had to perform a ruinous balancing act. They were forced to fund a world-class blue water navy to protect their global trade from the English, while simultaneously paying for a massive standing army and a chain of expensive border fortresses to stop the French from marching in. No nation of 2 million people could sustain that dual financial burden indefinitely. Any massive land invasion would instantly shatter their mercantile focus and drain the capital that kept their global shipping empire afloat. Across the Channel, the English watched Dutch prosperity with growing jealousy. In 1651, they passed the Navigation Acts, banning Dutch merchant ships from British ports. The resulting trade embargo triggered a series of bloody industrial-scale naval wars, fought by massive fleets of wooden ships in the North Sea. But the breaking point arrived in 1672, a year forever burned into Dutch memory as the disaster year. In a secret alliance with England, France's King Louis XIV sent an army of 120,000 elite soldiers across the Rhine. They bypassed the Dutch fortresses entirely and pushed directly into the heartland of the Republic. Completely defenseless on land, the Dutch executed a desperate, scorched earth defense. Engineers opened the sluice gates and deliberately breached their own dikes. They flooded thousands of square miles of fertile farmland with seawater, creating a shallow, impassable moat to halt the French cavalry outside Amsterdam. The floodwaters saved the city, but the psychological trauma broke the state. A terrified, furious mob in The Hague blamed Johan de Witt for leaving the border unguarded. They stormed the local prison, dragged him and his brother into the public square, and brutally lynched them, mutating into an uncontrollable frenzy that culminated in the crowd roasting and eating pieces of the brothers' flesh. The trauma of 1672 ended the era of unchecked maritime expansion. From this point forward, the Republic's wealth was no longer a tool for growth, but a necessary sacrifice for physical survival. With the De Witt brothers dead, a 21-year-old Prince of Orange, William III, took command. William was consumed by a single goal, stopping French expansion. Over the next 4 decades, he dragged the Republic into unending continental coalition wars, accumulating a crushing mountain of sovereign debt that consumed 70% of tax revenues. Then in 1688, William made his most fateful geopolitical move, seeking to bring English naval power into his alliance against France. He launched a massive invasion fleet and successfully conquered the British throne. Dutch history books celebrated this glorious revolution as the ultimate national triumph. In reality, the coronation marked the beginning of a massive transfer of power. Look at this visual showing the capital flow. Dutch merchants, banking families, and naval expertise began migrating directly to London, literally teaching the British fractional reserve banking. As London's financial ledger expanded, Amsterdam drained, as the Dutch financed the rival that would eventually replace them. A catastrophic division of labor took hold. The Dutch Republic bled its treasury dry, maintaining vast land armies to fight the French in Europe. This left Great Britain entirely free to focus its resources on the oceans, building a colossal Royal Navy and systematically seizing the global trade routes the Dutch had previously monopolized. The final death rattle sounded during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1780. The British Royal Navy effortlessly blockaded the entire Dutch coastline in a matter of weeks, trapping the once legendary Dutch fleets in their harbors and capturing their overseas colonies from Ceylon to the Caribbean. By 1799, the Dutch East India Company collapsed under immense debt and bureaucratic decay. The trillion-dollar corporate titan was officially nationalized and declared bankrupt. Simultaneously, the Bank of Amsterdam suffered a fatal run on its deposits. The Republic dissolved into a powerless French puppet state. The Dutch built the world's first modern capitalist empire on the fragile foundation of 2 million people living in a flooded swamp. They invented the stock market, the multinational corporation, and the global supply chain. But without the demographic scale and geographic isolation to defend those inventions, all that wealth and innovation simply served as a stepping stone for the superpower that followed.